Max Verstappen matches Michael Schumacher's feat of winning 3 consecutive Japanese Grand Prix. Meanwhile, for Mercedes, Daniel Ricciardo and Williams, their struggles continue. From RacingNews365.com, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm joined, as always, by lead editor Ian Parks. Ian, Max victorious, but the big talking point really in the race was within the first 20 seconds. Daniel Ricciardo, Alex Albon on the entry to turn 3. Quite a nasty accident, a 20-minute delay for a red flag for barrier repairs. I said yesterday Ricciardo finished top 7. My prediction was wrong within about 15 seconds.
Yeah, and apologies to people listening. I've got a very croaky voice. I've got a bit of a sore throat coming on, unfortunately. You couldn't call it. I mean, and what I mean by that is we've discussed so much in our chats in recent times, A, about Daniel Ricciardo, B, about Williams. And the driver, the team that have been involved in those chats are then involved in this major turn 3 incident as it transpired. You just got to feel for Daniel and you got to feel for Williams in certain respects, because neither he nor they really warranted that. But it's just one of those things. It happens. It's Grand Prix racing. They were jostling for position mid-pack. You just got to feel for them.
It's one of those.
As I say,
it's just one of those.
It's just
a racing incident, which is what the stewards decided as well.
You know, you look at the onboards and Daniel's looked in his left wing mirror. He spotted Aston Martin's Lance Stroll coming on his inside, but he's not done the quick dart to his right wing mirror to see if there's anybody there. He's reacted to his left, moved across on what was effectively going to be the racing line anyway, going into turn, shallow left-hander, turn 3 at Suzuka. And he's got Alex there. Front left of Alex's Williams, hits the rear right of Daniel's RB, and that's it. They both plough headfirst into that tyre barrier. For Daniel, okay, he's had a bad run of results. This was not his fault at the end of the day. You can't apportion any blame. As we've said, use the phrase again, one of those things. For Williams, the big talking point now is that car's going to go back to Grove to be assessed. Has this chassis cracked? If this chassis has cracked, we know that's going to put them in major difficulty for China, because James Vowles, after the chassis cracked, following Alex's crash in practice in Australia, made clear that they wouldn't yet be able to get another spare chassis ready until Miami. So, yeah, huge talking point now over the next few days around Williams and whether they're going to be racing one car or two in China.
And then to make Williams' woes that much worse, Logan Sargent, who was having an okay race actually, went off on his own accord at turn 9. Just a simple lock-up, easily done, went into the gravel, avoided the barrier, thankfully, did reverse out to keep going. But even for Ricciardo, this is, Tsunoda. Let's talk about him, because he's the Japanese driver, the home hero, the first Japanese driver to score points at the Japanese Grand Prix in 12 years. Yuki getting points just adds to, Ricciardo's currently worrying position.
I don't think Daniel will be too perturbed about that, to be honest, Nick. As we've said, there's nothing he could have done.
Yeah.
And in fairness, Yuki then went and drove a really solid race. I mean, the key for him was that absolute second pit stop melee that took place, I don't know, about 2/3 of the way, if I remember right. I think there were 4 cars that came in.
It was crazy. It was.
I think it was 5. 5, actually. There were 5 that came in, all on that one lap. And RB managed to get Yuki turned round and out first. And that was the absolute clincher for him. Without that, he don't think he would have got the point that he did.
Yeah.
So a great drive. And he's done well. He's doing well. We've discussed it yesterday after qualifying. He's doing really well at the moment. He's the one of the 2 RB drivers, without a shadow of a doubt. If, Red Bull are looking at not retaining Sergio Perez for 2025, then at the moment, he's going to be in contention, because he's doing a really solid, reasonable job. And that's all you can expect at this particular point. The car we know is not that great. It's definitely in the midfield pack, and he's managing to elevate it to a position where it's just behind the front runners, and it's ahead of some of those other teams that we know have been challenging. So yeah, for me, he's done a really great job this entire weekend. Home soil, different kettle of fish going to China. 5 years without a Grand Prix there, and we go one practice straight into a sprint event. That's something I know we're going to cover in the Chinese Grand Prix preview package when we come up to doing that. But yeah, it's going to be a really interesting weekend, that one, for all the drivers, not just Yuki and Daniel.
Well, there's already been a lot said, but as you mentioned, we'll discuss that at a later point, because this is all about Japan. And of course, as I mentioned, at the top of the show, it was Max Verstappen victorious, similar to last season when his winning streak came to an end in Singapore. He bounced back last year with a victory in Japan. He's done the same this season after his Australia retirement. He's bounced back with a third consecutive victory at Suzuka. I mean, pole position, fastest lap, the victory, just a typical Max Verstappen Sunday. Red Bull won too, but for Max, it's just the Max show.
Didn't quite get the Grand Chelem on this occasion, which of course is win, pole, fastest lap, leading every lap. The offsetting tyre strategies played quite a role in this Grand Prix, and that's what kept it interesting for us as viewers, as journalists, for all you fans out there as well. I'm sure it kept it a little bit interesting, even though I remarked in the intro of my race report that Max was anonymous. And the only reason why he was anonymous to a certain extent, because we barely saw anything of him during the entire Grand Prix. All the TV camera work was focused on what was going on behind with those different strategies with the tyres, etc. He did point out in his post-race press conference there were two key things that led to that victory today. Number one was the fact that changes were made to his RB20 going into qualifying, and he hadn't got a read on those changes that were race related, because of course they were made on the back of practice, because he wasn't happy with the car's race pace. He mentioned that in the post-qualifying press conference. Of course, came away with pole and then smashes it with his race pace over the course of the 53 laps, predominantly. Bearing in mind we had that red flag incident, of course. And the second incident was a little exchange he had with his race engineer, Giampiero Lambiase. Giampiero turned around and said to him, "I told you so." And that was basically something to do with little tweaks that were made at the first pit stop to Max's car. And Max had gone one way. Giampiero had obviously said pre-race, "I think we should go this way." So they made the slight little subtle changes at the first pit stop, and it worked in Giampiero's favour. Those two, a great double act. They work as a team. And yeah, we've had some fire exchanges in the past, but they just work so hand in glove with one another. They know each other perfectly. They know what gets each other going. And Max said that little exchange just fired him up to go out and perform even better because of those little changes that have been made on the car. So yeah, whatever Max and Giampiero do, whatever Red Bull are doing, it's just working wonders at the minute. They've produced another great car with the RB20. Toto Wolff has pretty much also called the title race today, saying no one's going to stop Max. Still another 20 races to go. There's still a lot that could happen.
Another 20.
But yes, another 20. But yeah, this early stage, obviously, yes, things are going in Max's favour. We've got to simply hope, from a neutral perspective, that we do get some mixed up races over the course of the next 20. At this stage, is Toto correct? No, it's too early, but it's looking very good for Red Bull, Max, and that RB20.
And actually, if you look today behind Max in first and Checo in second, the race behind was actually fairly decent. Obviously, the reason why Max didn't lead every single lap is mainly because of Charles Leclerc and Ferrari's very clever strategy with him. He was one of the only drivers, only in the top 10, but actually the entire field, to successfully make a one-stop strategy work. Mercedes tried, failed miserably, but we'll discuss that later on. Leclerc started in 8th, went for the one-stop, led when Max pitted, led then for several laps. But his race pace and tyre management was so good that actually he ended up finishing 4th, was only pipped by Carlos Sainz for the podium. But when you then look at Mercedes, who, Lewis Hamilton complained that he wanted them to change strategy because the one stop just didn't work for Mercedes, whereas for Ferrari, their tyre struggles from last season are no more.
Pretty obviously, yeah, a really valid point, that one, Nick, to be honest with you. And as you pointed out, what Charles did, in particular, that first stint after the red flag in extending the tyre life of those mediums was quite extraordinary. You mentioned Mercedes there, with what you just said. Just to give people a quick précis version of what happened after the red flag, we had that 32-minute delay.
Yeah.
And teams can make a tyre change if they want. It was so early in the race that pretty much, I think, every other driver, with the exception, actually, no, some switched to softs just thinking about it, but Mercedes, certainly of the lead runners, to put it that way, of the lead runners, Mercedes was the only team that changed. They decided they'd started on the medium. We had the red flag. They decided during the interlude to go for a really risky one stop and change tyre to the hard for that stint post red flag. Ferrari kept Charles on the mediums. He did absolutely brilliantly. Didn't work for Mercedes. And Lewis really struggled. Lewis Hamilton in particular really struggled. Mentioned on the radio that he was having issues. They switched him onto a second set of hard. Now, George managed to make his first hard stint work that little bit better, that allowed him to go onto the mediums for his second stint, and that then allowed him the attack on Oscar Piastri for seventh position. But for Charles to do what he did, I think it was something like 25, 26 laps.
It was a monster stint, given how difficult time management is at Suzuka of all places. And I think the most impressive thing, as you kind of mentioned there, he did this, his first real stint on the medium compound. Mercedes were on the hard, the tyre that's supposed to last longer, but had more issues. It's almost like Mercedes and Ferrari have done a bit of a switcheroo. Ferrari have suddenly got the good tyre management and the good strategies, whereas Mercedes can't look after their tyres. And as we saw today, their strategies just, they're having to be risky to make up the time because they just don't have the pace. Despite the fact on Friday, Lewis in particular was singing the praises of the W15.
Yeah, because there are certain good points at that W15 that they have managed to work on to a certain degree. One of the good points in particular was qualifying.
Yeah.
For the first time, Mercedes managed to go into Q3 with 2 new sets of softs. They'd not managed to do that at all at the previous 3 Grand Prix because of they just weren't able to get the best out of the softs, and they had to use other sets in either Q1 or Q2 to get through. So at least that's a small grain of progress for Mercedes in this particular instance. But yeah, race pace clearly wasn't there today, clearly not the circuit for them. Whereas Ferrari, if anybody's going to be challenging Max and Red Bull, aside from Checo maybe throwing his hat into the ring on the odd occasion, like he did with qualifying here or at Suzuka, then it's looking like Ferrari. They're at least posing Red Bull questions, offering them a threat to a certain degree that's going to hopefully in the coming races make them question strategy, make them try and do something different, and give us some real good hardcore racing at the front for those top 3 positions. That's all we look for as neutrals at the end of the day. As we always say, hats off to Max, hats off to Red Bull, but we want to see great racing at the front. Ferrari are edging towards that. They're giving us something at least to talk about in a positive respect, bearing in mind, as you've pointed out as well, tyre woes last year and race pace predominantly on many occasions last year. They really, really struggled. So on this occasion, they certainly look like they've got to grips with it, which is great for us.
To round up, biggest takeaway of the weekend. I'm going to go first because I've just thrown this on you to give you time to think. For me, as you kind of mentioned, the biggest takeaway for me is Ferrari, because I think we have seen now that after 4 rounds, they are quite clearly Red Bull's biggest competitor. And I think actually when it comes to race pace, I think there's actually then quite a big gap from Ferrari to the likes of McLaren, Mercedes, and Aston Martin. A special mention for Fernando Alonso, said that today was one of the top 5 best drivers of his career. He's the only one doing stuff for Aston Martin currently. But I think we are definitely seeing now that Ferrari are the second best team. And actually, I think there's a bigger gap than perhaps we realised coming into this season then between second and Ferrari to McLaren, Aston Martin, and Mercedes, which reflects in the championship. So for you, Ian, come on, biggest takeaway. Is it going to be bold, or is it going to be as boring as mine?
No, that's not boring. That's a fair assessment, in all honesty. Now, the biggest takeaway for me was, aside, we've discussed Mercedes at length, so I'm going to switch to something different. And I'm going to say biggest takeaway for me was the disappointment surrounding McLaren.
Yeah, actually, that's a good one.
When you consider what they did at last year's Japanese Grand Prix, both in qualifying and in the race, second and third, and then they looked strong coming out of qualifying. We were both anticipating, I was certainly expecting one McLaren to be on the podium.
Yeah.
We're naturally going towards Lando, of course, bearing in mind he qualified in a reasonable position, qualified third. So, yeah, I was expecting more from them, to be honest. I really was. So for them to struggle with their own tyre wear issues, I mean, if you think that Lando was the first in on the medium compound in that first stint post-red flag,
yeah,
Charles Leclerc did double what Lando did in that first stint on his mediums. That's a massive gap to make up for McLaren to work out future tyre wear at future Grand Prix. So, yeah, I was really surprised, quite disappointed, because I was expecting far more from them, particularly not just so far this season, but especially this Grand Prix, and especially after what they did in qualifying.
Well, for those watching as well, let us know in the comment section your biggest takeaway. And a special mention, I'm going to check my notebook, a special mention to Markintosh 9281, because they correctly predicted which 10 drivers would finish in the top 10, almost the right order as well. So congrats to that, because that's, I said Ricciardo finished top 7. Like I said, that was over in the first 15 seconds. The prize giveaway as well will be announced on Monday. The draw is closed. There is no more time to enter. So make sure you're tuning into the podcast to find out if you have won Red Bull or Ferrari merchandise. From myself and Ian, we will catch you on Monday in the podcast. We'll see you later.
And keep listening, folks, and keep watching, because there will be future prizes coming up across the course of this season, and some big ones as well we've been promised. So keep an eye out for those. Take care now.